So I'm here along the James River during the week that began with Indigenous Peoples Day. Maybe when many of us think about Jamestown, we think about two ideas: Pocahontas, the Native American princess, and we also think about the dark early days of what would become U.S. slavery in 1619. But in what ways do these two histories merge? Pocahontas, whose given name was Matioka, was a favorite daughter of Chief Powhatan, and where I'm sitting was once part of his kingdom. Pocahontas was a child of about 12 or 13 when she allegedly threw her own head atop Captain John Smith's. What we know is what John Smith wrote, so he was known to spin the truth sometimes, so we really have to take this with a grain of salt. But we do know it's likely that sometimes Pocahontas, or Matioka, visited the English at Jamestown and played with the English boys during that very strained time between Native Americans and the English settlers here. She, being allowed to play with the boys, the English children, was under the supervision, of course, of Native American elders, but it was also in part because that Chief Powhatan may have wanted to establish a sort of casual relationship with the English, even amidst this very difficult time. But later, John Smith returned to England, and the relationships between the Powhatans and the English completely dissolved. They completely fell apart. And at that point, this was the English suffered during what they call the starving time. They resorted to eating cats, dogs, horses, each other. They did resort to cannibalism. It was a very difficult time, and many English settlers died. So it was after this time that, right around after this time, that one Englishman, John Rolfe, was experimenting with a strain of tobacco that was imported from the Caribbean. He was using seeds that were imported from the Caribbean. And this was the beginnings of a cash crop of tobacco that could be exported to England. And meanwhile, Matioka, who was about 18 at one point, was captured by the English for ransom. Her prison was the home of an English minister, and while she was there, she learned more English and she was taught Christianity. Now, about a year later, she did have the opportunity to return to her own people, but she declined it. This might have been because that she felt that her own people didn't do enough to get her out of ransom. She might have also felt some stirrings of affection for John Rolfe, who had declared his affections in a letter for her. So she and John Rolfe married in 1614, and this began an era of relative peace and trade between the English and the Native Americans. But prosperity for the English colony was still elusive. Tobacco had not quite produced the wealth that they had hoped. So what some of the English thought of was to bring Pocahontas, Matioka, renamed Rebecca, given a Christian name, Rebecca, to England as a marketing ploy, and that's exactly what happened. Now, Chief Powhatan, meanwhile, thought this was a great opportunity to bring along, of course, an elder with a Powhatan elder with Matioka to just gather intelligence about the English in their homeland, and that's exactly what happened. However, Matioka, she did become a mother by now, but she never came home from England. She died on the way back, and she was about 21 years old, and her father died only about a year later. What outlasted both of them was the tobacco crop. Plantations were established along the James River here, and Native American tribes continued to suffer. And it was John Rolfe, who was, of course, Matioka's widower, in fact, who wrote of the 20 and odd Negroes who were captured in Angola by the Portuguese and later brought here to the James River. And this, of course, they, of course, began the first seeds of what would become chattel slavery here in the U.S. And so that's how these histories merge, and that's what they have in common.